So I'm the lead partner for Microsoft for EY. So I look after all the Microsoft services. And in fact, two of the comments last night are, am I an auditor? I went, no. Said, are you an accountant? I went, no, I'm not either of those things. I'm a Microsoft person. So basically, all I talk about is Microsoft and Microsoft tech. And I've had 22 years working in conjunction with Microsoft. So EY in the UK has hundreds of people just focused purely on Microsoft technology. But on top of that, we do extra services. So the partnership that we actually have with Dell is totally complementary. So what we do and what Dell do is different. They have some fantastic products that I think are great. And I've
Thanks, Julian. We'll pay you later.
You pay. It's only a drink. It's fine. So we have some fantastic services, and obviously you probably know us from business transformation and some of the tech transformation. But also we're doing back office deployments on Dynamics and Dynamics front office as well. We do focus on customer growth and the customer growth element to that, but organization and people. So we've built a product on top of Viva. And again, if you're not looking at Viva, please look at Viva. Microsoft's got Viva Sales. Everyone thinks that Viva is just this thing that pops in your inbox. It's not. It's free. And it does Viva Sales, and there's a whole raft of other things that sit underneath the Viva format. But also we'll look at the risk and the contingency around that. Now, over to yourself.
Thanks,
Margaret.
Julian. Morning, everybody. So I work at Dell, and I'm sure you're all going to say we're just a laptop provider, but actually, it's a bit of a misnomer. Dell does a lot more in terms of infrastructure, and we're pivoting the business model quite a bit now to hybrid infrastructure. So you'll see a lot of language around multi-cloud, but Dell is really moving to develop out relationships with some of our cloud providers, and the biggest one right now is Microsoft. So we've got almost a three-way relationship going on between Dell, Microsoft, and EY, which is great. Delighted to be here this morning. I lead out on our relationships, our global partnerships, and I'd love to talk to some of you later on today around how you're managing your ecosystem. So we're going to spend a little bit about time just talking about how Dell has moved its ecosystem and the relationship that we've got with Julian and the EY team. Right, shall we crack into it?
Yep.
Okay. I guess just touching on that, really, there's a lot more to be said around getting value from the ecosystem, and we're spending a lot of time with some of our major clients at the moment, really taking a look at how they're looking at working with partners, how they're looking with vendors. I was talking to one of our clients here this morning around shifting the business model from being a vendor to being much more of a partner. And I think that's something that Dell really experienced throughout the pandemic, right? As we shifted our relationship from being much more of a commodity player to being much more of a partner. So there's some stats that our EY friends have come out with, really, which are pretty hard hitting, right? So on average, high performing ecosystems drive 1.5 times more results in terms of incremental revenue. And I think that's something I'd be really curious to hear how you guys are all looking at your technology ecosystems. And is it shifting from being a commodity ecosystem to being much more of a partner? Julian, do you want to add anything on that? Because I think you've lived a long life, but a long journey and a positive journey with Microsoft, right? And you're really seeing the value coming through now where you're bringing this through to EY and with us as well around the value of the ecosystem.
Well, if you look at the multi-cloud, each one of you will have multi-cloud. Typically, and we've noticed this across enterprises, and in fact some very, very large organizations, where you'll talk to Microsoft and they said, no, the client is totally committed to Azure. Yeah. And you talk to the client and they said, well, we've got Azure and we're spending 3 million a month with Azure, but actually we're spending 1 million a month with AWS. Yeah. So the client is actually being quite open with us and what their strategy is, but Microsoft are very blinkered and saying, well, no, the client is going this way. And then you start to underneath the bonnet with the client and saying, well, what else are you doing? Well, actually I'm doing Google Cloud. Okay, do you know how much you're spending on that? No. So it's quite interesting when you actually start to look at the corporate strategy, and they're sat there saying, our strategy happens to be Microsoft. But actually there are 2, 3, maybe 4 other things. And what we're actually seeing is the departments, and especially if you look at something like Microsoft Power Platform, and they're talking about the system development, the departments themselves are building their own code. Now, that's going to give you guys big problems on your center of excellence. So if you take something like and again, I was talking to a client recently, thank you. I was talking to a client recently where they actually have 110,000 lines of an Excel, and they call it their database. And this is the business. And I said, well, okay, your rows, how many columns have you got? Well, we can't really count them, but it's greater than 256. Can I ask how many people actually access that Excel system? Yeah, 2,500. So for a technology technologists like me, I know A, it's going to crash and can crash very, very quickly. And they said, well, yeah, but we can only get 20 people in at a time, but 2,500 people have to look at it. And I said, well, what's your transformation plan on that particular Excel, and how many more have you got across the business? So there is high demand for these tools, but we've really got to look at what's under the bonnet, and we've really got to say, okay, how do we actually standardize this, and how do we stop these people creating these Excel data estates in essence? And that's where the Power Platform sits in. 22%, we said, but we think this is actually a lot higher. Enterprise architecture and technology are the key challenges. It's more than that, and we're seeing these pockets of departments building. And again, I was talking to people last night about SharePoint farms. Now, and again, it depends. If you talk to Microsoft, they'll tell you it's unstructured data and it's unsecured data. But you're all technologists in the room. We're all well aware that I can spin up a SharePoint through Teams, or I can spin up another SharePoint access point quite quickly. When an employee leaves, what actually happens to that SharePoint? It typically dies, but it's still there. What happens with your email? It typically stays there in the background. And in fact, so there's all these challenges that you are facing that we, as vendors, have to help you to go through.
Yeah. And I think, well, that's it, right? And it really is the point around the vendors helping them through. So I think going back to it, I think both EY and Dell are really trying to pivot to being much more of a strategic partner. So it is really trying to understand what your challenges are. I think the other point that Dell is really seeing from an on-prem situation is we're moving much more towards a hybrid world. And I'd be curious to hear how you guys are balancing that, right? Your on-prem data, we had a really great chat this morning with somebody around data sovereignty and regulations and the need to hold it on-prem and manage their own data. How do you back that up? How is it secure? And then how do you balance those relationships with the cloud providers, right? So how do you harmonize all of that? So security is playing much more of a role in our conversations around data more and more. Some of that is getting lost. In fact, there's a serious concern from the Dell side around data not being fully backed up and protected. And we'll touch on that as we go through. Julian, do you want to touch on ecosystems? We kind of played that one out already, but
we have. Yeah, we've gone through.
Collaboration.
Yeah, I think on the collaboration, again, talking about the Power Platform and the other tools that are under the bonnet, please review what you've actually got there and come up with the centre of excellence. There is some off-the-shelf tools that Microsoft have got, and EY have got some services around that, where we've got a set of services that will go in and help you to actually format that correctly. But also think about, okay, if I've got an Excel or I've got a team site, or where can that data actually go? And in a lot of instances, that data is not protected, but Microsoft has some free products that you can actually put into place so that the data doesn't go out of the business. And you guys probably know about this. But a lot of organizations don't, and the individuals will start spinning up their other sites. So it's all about collaboration and collaboration across the business. There's a particular client that we've been working with where they're maintaining infrastructure, UK infrastructure. And they actually said, well, we want to collaborate. And this was during COVID, actually. Yeah. And they turned and actually said, well, how do we get data out into the field? These people are not coming back into the office. They're maintaining UK infrastructure. COVID's hit. How do we get it out there? So we deployed 10,000 users on mobile phones to allow them to carry on their day job. And this is UK infrastructure, critical infrastructure. Okay, it wasn't heavily used during the COVID lockdown, but after that it started to get maximized again. That code and that deployment carried on post. But again, it's all about securing data. Once that job had been done, we deleted the data off the device and we went on to the next job. It meant they didn't have to go back to the depot to get their next work. So it's all about collaborating. But at the same time, the central knew where that person was and how they could use it. Now, where do we put that data? Do we put it in Azure? Do we put it in AWS? Where do we put it? Yeah. And how do we actually move that through? Is it on-prem or is it in the cloud?
Yeah, and then layered on with the security conversation, I guess, at how the data is being protected, backed up, how ready is the organization for any event of a cyber attack, which we know will be imminent for most organizations as well. Yeah. Do you want to just share a little bit about the methodology, I think, that you've worked through with Microsoft?
Yeah, we start on the discovery plan where we'll actually sit and say, what are we trying to achieve? But actually, EY has basically tech transformation services where we're actually talking to a lot of clients, where we'll go in and talk at the board level and at the next level down and saying, okay, what are some of your challenges? And what some of my colleagues have actually done is saying, hold on a minute, we've found that there's pockets of this. How can we actually resolve it? And that's where we've come in to say, hold on a minute, Microsoft got tools around this on the Power Platform or on different platforms that we can actually utilize and out of the box. Now, this comes back to the art of the possible. So we've discovered an opportunity, but then we might scope out that opportunity. One particular client said, you've got 14 days to turn our problem into a solution. And they said, you can't do it. We've been 15 years trying to fix this problem. And I said, okay, I'll put 2 engineers on it. And after 14 days, we then went back to that director, and it was an enterprise business, and we showed them how they could actually deploy this type of technology. So it was actually turned in quite quickly. Post that, we then built a plan around that and where the data should be, where the data sovereignty should be, and what environments they need to deploy in. Again, this was an environment that was deployed to about 1,000 people. Again, but it wasn't spotted, so we had to look at it and then say, okay, this is how we move it forward.
Brilliant. So I think in terms of what does this all mean in the true spirit of partnership, I think we've kind of built our partnership together around these three themes. The big one being the partner ecosystem, and we are really trying to pivot much more towards working with partners. We cannot. Dell is a product company at its essence, and we are pivoting much more towards an as-a-service model and an outcome-based model. So really, we really do need EY to work with, and obviously we're working very tightly with Microsoft now. So this is a kind of a three-way partnership that we're building. There's some questions that we'd like to kind of pose to you guys as leading technologists and innovators here today. And I guess the first one being on that ecosystem, because it's not easy. Like, we'll be honest, right? It's taken a lot of time. Every time we start a new relationship with a cloud provider, we need to bring the right talent on board. So we'd love to hear, how are you guys approaching this? How are you maximizing the value? Where are you getting the talent? How are you developing that talent? And as that model evolves with the partner, how are you evolving the relationship as well and the governance with that? I think the other element of it is the trust levels, right? So I touched on it earlier on. We are moving much more from being a transactional organization, so that kind of transactional trust level as such, to being much more strategic. And I think that's the value, truly, of the EY and Dell relationship that's coming to the fore. So keen to kind of hear some of your insights around how you're having those relationships with vendors. What are the lessons learned? We want the feedback as well to understand how's the relationship been with Dell. And then how are you coordinating the access on the data side? And I think you and I have had many conversations on this one, right? I think this is huge. How do you harmonize that? How do you manage it? How do you modernize the data? But how do you really protect it and look after it as well? Do you want to just touch on the data one? Because I think with so many vendors, and we've heard about a lot of organizations consolidating down the vendor list and the partner list, but the data access is a big one, right?
It is, but this is where Dell's actually got some fantastic tools. And remember, I work for EY, I don't work for Dell. But I've actually found they've got some great tools, and there's a product, you know what we're saying.
Thank you. Honestly, we are not paying Julian. It might appear that we are, but we're not.
There is a problem out there. There's a problem with resources. Who knows? I mean, if you look at the Azure resource, you look at AWS resource, they're very expensive. Yeah. But if we can look at tools to actually streamline that resource, and Dell's got a product that can actually help you to look at the dashboard and look at where your data really is. Yeah. So you could have some on-prem, but then you've also got to manage AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and potentially Alibaba as it comes along. But the tools that they've got allow you to do that. And therefore, you don't need the number of staff to do it, because you can implement it very quickly and deploy. But how interoperable is your cloud strategy? Yeah. And then really, and again, these are the questions we want you to hopefully take away and think about. And one of the critical ones is all about spend. Where is your spend going? Yeah. But are your vendors actually giving you the rebates? And again, I've come across a few clients where Microsoft turned to me and said, look, this client's got a £3 million rebate. So I went to the CFO and said, you've got a £3 million rebate. It's a huge UK company. And he said, well, I haven't got time to spend it. So at the end of June, the money disappeared. So there are rebates from your vendors, and what I'd like you to do is really think about that. But also, I'd like you to think about the Azure OpEx and the Google Cloud OpEx, and by how much are you really actually utilizing that? And working with Dell, you can actually turn some of that OpEx into real value. So for example, you may be spending, let's say, $1 million a month on Azure, right? Are you really using $1 million a month? Are you using 500 grand a month? Microsoft will still charge you that $1 million a month, because that's what you've agreed to in your true-up or your license agreement. But hold on, surely, and this is the discussion, and this is some of the work we've been doing with Dell, you can use that 500K for any extra services. And that's the point, is you're actually going to stretch your OpEx budgets without dipping into CapEx. But by the same token, Microsoft's got some funding sat there that is always available to you if you're buying licenses. And I think every person in this room, including me, because I buy it at home, I get licenses. I don't get a rebate for my licenses I use at home. I wish I did. But there are rebates available. And what I'd actually ask you to do is go to Softcat, go to some of these guys and ask them about their rebates. Because it's sat there. And if you don't ask, it'd be worthwhile just taking it like a show of hands from you guys about, how are you navigating that? Like, is that an easy conversation? Are you having that conversation around rebates?
I know it's a very tactical one, but it's actually quite a significant play for all of you. And there are, like, it's hard to navigate it around, right? It truly is. So just a quick show of hands, like, are you involved in the rebate conversations? Are you tapping into that? Are you leveraging that? Is there a strategy in your organization for that? Don't be shy. No. Honestly, we do want this to be as engaging as possible. So yeah, it's a difficult one, right? And it's one that we're certainly navigating. Dell has a huge Dell Financial Services capability, and we are working with a lot of providers, but typically we're trying to develop this out with you guys in EY around the OpEx and CapEx optimization play, right? And we'd love to have a follow-up conversation with some of you to see if there's any way to support you there.
But we can actually take you as the client and have that discussion, a three-way discussion with Microsoft, and we can actually say, okay, what is available and when is it available and when it's available to spend? Because there is significant funds sat there. And remember what you're investing in, it is infrastructure. And it is the Microsoft services. And another element to that is, what is your IT strategy around data? We've talked about data sovereignty, data security, and as I said, Microsoft's got some great products that you can just slot in and they can be utilised. Again, talking about Teams and talking about SharePoint, there are products that we can slot into that. And again, please look at Viva. If the one thing you do after this session, go outside, have a look at Viva Sales, Viva Collaboration, and again, you've probably not heard of these, but they're there. They're actually sat there. And Viva, when it comes into your inbox, I actually do look at it because it does remind me to do things. It's a bit, sometimes I'll delete it. But the next day it's then said, have you done this? And it's learning. Every time it's learning. So remember that Microsoft have got an RPA tool that's a low-cost RPA tool. Again, they will go head-to-head against some of the enterprise tools, but remember they've got RPA, remember they've got Power BI, and again, they're cost-effective. Think what Microsoft actually does. It goes out there, it goes into the marketplace, and they will go lower, and they'll go to the enterprise vendors. They'll eventually get there. So have a look at their RPA tool. Again, it's on the Power Platform. I think potentially it's a very, very good tool, but the license price is totally different from the likes of Blue Prism. So again, please look at what the stack you get, and you get included in your license cost. That hits collaboration because it means we can get more of this data out to the users, out in the field. But really, again, when Microsoft talks about the citizen developer, it's interesting in the past 6 months, I haven't heard the term citizen developer, but it's still out there. We're seeing people developing Power Platform and deploying them, but that's on top of your data. We're seeing data leaks coming out of it. Think about how you protect those data leaks. Think of how you can actually secure your data, because that's, in essence, when I first was writing these questions out, I actually thought, I used the term goldmine, and it is. But then it comes onto the security element to it.
And I before we just jump on security, I just wanted to touch on a really interesting conversation with some of you last night over dinner around kind of the future of work and how you're navigating your organization. So how you're pivoting the workforce to work either in a hybrid fashion or back in the office, and what kind of collaboration tools are you using, and you're getting the most out of them, right? And a lot of these tools, and you touched on Viva quite heavily, I think you're a massive fan. But I think, you know, like all of this comes down to a lot of business change and change management, and we see this as technology providers, but we really do need the elements of change management and strong leadership here too, to make sure the culture is being developed in the right way. I think there's a question there, Julian, that I think you might have put in around the diverse digital workforce, and how we leveraging these platforms to really build out and manage kind of the future talent expectations of an organization. There's a lot that, you know, both of us are unpicking, not just with clients, but also in our own organizations. It'd be good to hear a little bit more on that.
Well, we were talking about how, and again, EY's got a department called Powers, and again, it's all about utilising, we were talking about cameras being turned on or off, and what is the standardisation on that, and how do we encourage the use of technology.
So this on Zoom calls or team calls, whether you've got your camera on or not, so
you said last night, is that we're finding that the Generation Z are actually turning their cameras off. And we're finding, and we're actually asking people to turn the cameras on because we want to see them. So are they doing something else? And you had a challenge with someone actually saying, no, it's affecting my mental health. So you've really got to take advice on, can we turn these cameras off? Can we force these people to turn these cameras on or off? And by the same token, how many times are people actually going into the office? Do they need to go into the office? And what we're actually seeing is the standardization coming out. And when, for example, Facebook have kicked off and said, look, you will be in the office X numbers of days, and again, everyone's seen that they've made 11,000 redundancies in the past week, but they're pushing people to be in their office. They're actually saying, if you want to work for Facebook, then you've got to be visible in the office. So it's quite interesting how work is changing.
Definitely.
But again, it's about, we saw productivity rocket during COVID. We've seen it dip a bit with Teams, people turning off their cameras on Teams calls. So it's interesting.
It is, and the cultural elements of that, about how do you kind of maximise and create the right inclusive culture that encourages a diverse workforce. You know, I just think there's so many interesting threads coming through here. And obviously you've got to get the technology right. So I think we're focusing on that, but we're very mindful of the need for leadership and good change management as well. I'd love to hear how some of you are doing novel ways to make sure you build out that diverse workforce and that you're truly getting a kind of collaborative culture in the organization that leverages some of these platforms too.
So just onto security,
Yep.
and I know there's a different security session going on there, but for the people in this room, just think about what is your minimum viable vibusiness or minimum viable company. So if you got hit, what actually is going to happen? And again, I asked this question from some of the leaders out there to say, okay, can you tell me where what is the platforms you need? Where is your data stored? And typically we're finding about 80% of organizations don't know what their minimum viable company is in terms of infrastructure, in terms of data, in terms of platform.
Yeah, I was going to say, does that make sense to everybody? Have you heard that language before? Because if not, we can just go into a little bit more deeper. But I think what you're getting at, Julian, what are the critical assets and what are the critical data that needs to be saved in the event of a cyber ransomware attack? Quick show of hands, has anybody gone through this exercise? How many of you gone through it? Are you involved in it from a tech perspective? Don't be shy. Thank you, Liz. Right, okay, there's quite a few, right? Like, it is actually vital. Like from a Dell perspective, we're seeing a ransomware attack every 11 seconds in the UK right now. And that's that truly is both public and private sector clients, right? It's small and large clients. So cybersecurity, alongside the collaboration tools, alongside the proliferation of hybrid working, it's really important to get this right. And it's a lot on technology and it's a lot on the business. And so I think there's a big challenge to kind of help our clients and our customers navigate this one as well. But I think the minimal viable company one is tough, right? We found that certainly some of the leadership teams that we've worked with, and I think we're starting to work a lot more with you guys to be collaborative around this, is there's so much procrastination about what does sit in those critical data sets, right? That actually it takes quite a while for an organization to pin down what goes into that minimal viable company. Meanwhile, we're just seeing this absolute surge in ransomware at the same time. So a lot of exposure going on right now. I think one of the things that we are really focused on is building an enterprise resilience strategy alongside this hybrid working strategy, alongside leveraging the ecosystem, and really thinking about enterprise resilience. And I don't, like normally Dell would kind of position this as cyber resilience, and we've really pivoted to talking much more about the enterprise because we recognize the business has to come on board, that it can't also just sit within the security function or the technology function. So business continuity planning alongside that too. Okay, so I think maybe, Julian, you can close this out.
So if you want to meet up with us, obviously some of you are meeting up with us today. We've got the stand just outside, but please reach out. And I know already from last night, a few people already reached out to me on LinkedIn. So please continue that discussion. If you want to have a discussion about some of our experiences, please come and ask. As I said, I've been doing this for 30 years.
You have not.
So
we'll start at 5.
I'll take any compliments.
Come on.
I'll take any compliments.
But I think it's true to say, like, we get so much from listening to you guys and learning from you and understanding what your perspectives are. And we want the challenge back, right? So if you need to kind of get questions and understand if you've got any perspectives on this, or if you could challenge us on some of the points, right? Because, this is all about learning and collaboration and really understanding how we can get better as partners to you guys as our client base. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you. Thanks.